I'll be back when I can. Bam.
This is Rob Neyer, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
I love it. This is fun. I always love talking with you. It makes my heart happy that we get to talk about baseball. And, it's a neat thing with the modern time, Rob, where someone like me can have a show, even though it's well established. You didn't ever have to say yes. And yet we've done these, I don't know, a dozen times or something like that. It's just amazing to me that we get to do this stuff.
I remember the first one in a coffee shop in Ladd's Edition in Portland, Oregon. And I couldn't believe you could actually record a podcast surrounded by other humans like 6 feet away, but you did it and it worked.
Yeah, it worked. It was great. And by the way, you got to say hi to Brian. Brian's always here on the show. Brian and I talk baseball all the time, and we see the world in a different way than a lot of fandom does. And so welcome back, Brian. And we'll maybe talk about your book a little bit. Brian has a forthcoming book about ancient baseball history from the Caribbean era. And it is just a remarkable body of work. So Brian, thanks for coming on.
Appreciate that. Appreciate it, Rob.
Brian, well, you want to ask a question for Rob, I'm sure. So I'll let you have the mic.
Yeah, I've obviously read a bunch of your stuff from, back when I was a kid in the teens and stuff. And I'm curious, why do you believe pitching took off in analytics more than hitting did? It seems to me that pitching was like Craig Wright. He seemed to be far more into the pitching the pitching side of the game, and hitting's always kind of catching up. And of course, the pitcher has the ball, the pitcher's in control, and the batter's always reacting. But why is it that you think sabermetrics took to pitching more so than hitting?
That's an interesting question. I think you touched up there. I think there are two primary reasons, and you touched on one of them, which is that the pitcher has the initiative. He gets to make the decisions, as opposed to the hitter, who, yes, has decisions to make in a couple of ways. One, he can decide before the pitch is even coming, I'm going to take this one. That happens all the time. 3-0, you're usually going to take, right? Usually when a batter goes to the plate, he has an idea what he wants to do with the first pitch. Many hitters, Wade Boggs, I remember, would basically never swing at the first pitch. A lot of pinch hitters say they go up there wanting to swing at the first pitch. So there are decisions to be made before the pitch is thrown, but for the most part, hitting is reactive and pitching is not. The other reason is, I think, that there's just so much more data for pitchers, and it has been for a long time. I guess the original pitcher data was you could look at strikeouts and walks. You can't really analyze those things very well. But once people started counting pitches and types of pitches, which I'm blanking on his name. I do that all the time. Alan Roth, who was the statistician for the Dodgers in the 1950s and 60s, he actually counted pitch types, I believe. So if you were the Dodgers and you were of an analytical bent, even back then, you could sort of go, oh, well, this guy is really good throwing this pitch to these types of batters, but not so much with this pitch. So the data has always been more substantial or substantive, I think, for pitchers. And I think that's still true, not as much because of the technology that now exists that allows hitters to analyze their swing paths and their exit velocity and all those things. But those are relatively recent innovations. So until the last 5 or 10 years, certainly there just wasn't much to go on for a hitter. I will say, as far as hitting analysis, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some interesting things that were done, but one of my favorite baseball images ever is that nutty strike zone that Ted Williams came up with for his book, The Science of Hitting. I think that was the book was called, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And with all the different color-coded baseballs. And you know what, I should know who invented that. I mean, I know it was probably his idea, but it was made up. Like, if you look at the box that he had down here in the far outside corner, it probably said something like 220 or 190 or whatever. Because each of the balls, they all had different colors. They were color-coded, I should say. And each of the balls had a little batting average number on it. And I have to think he just made those up. But it was an attempt, and it probably wasn't that far off, at least for most of those little baseballs. And that book came out in, I believe, 1972 or 73, or early 70s. So that's the first example I've seen of someone trying to analyze statistically the things that a hitter does beyond just the basic statistics. So it's just really, it's mostly about the paucity of information that we have always had for hitters. It's a very long-winded answer to a cool question.
No, not to get too personal, but I read that I was always a decent ball player. Like I wasn't all district or anything like that, but I always started and everything. And I read that book in 8th grade from the school library. And I went from, just being a kid that hit 300 and swung at everything to just being like an on-base machine. Like I started looking at way more pitches. I realized the kids on my team that were talking that they could, oh, I have this breaking ball. It's more of a slurve. I'm like, you're full of it, dude. You can't throw a breaking pitch for a strike. So I just started watching so many pitches and getting on base so much, and it really improved me as a player.
Well, the funny thing about that book, and I wrote about this, I'll try to refer to my own work just this once, or at least not much more than this, because I always feel like it's sort of a impolite to talk about your own work. Like, probably in a perfect world, everybody already knows your work, and so they can refer to it. But having said that, I will refer back to my book. There it is. Nice work. Yeah. I love it. I'll refer to a book I wrote, which came out in the fall of 2018. So it's been 7 years, called Powerball. And I wrote about this a little bit, about Ted Williams and his book. And what remains striking to me is that book became, for you and many other thousands of kids, Don Mattingly was another one, I think, who worshipped that book.
Carried it everywhere.
Became their hitting Bible, basically. And yet, so we saw that graphic with the strike zone, which basically the idea there is, hey, this is where you can get your hits. Wait for a good pitch. Don't even swing at those ones in the corners, because your batting average is going to be terrible if you swing at them, right? The other thing that he preached that I never forgot, there are more images in that book, where Williams showed, you guys know where I'm heading with this, the optimal swing path. And for those who can see this, and I guess that's most of the people listening, the pitch is coming on a downward plane, right? Because the pitcher is pitching from a mound, and sometimes it's 7 feet tall too, by the way. Well, if you want to make solid on-the-nose contact, your best swing path is like this. This is in the book, very clearly demarcated in multiple graphics. And yet, even today, after not only that book, but also a million pieces of video that show exactly what happens when a hitter makes the best possible contact, you still have people out there preaching, and I'm talking about professional, not only teachers, but professional hitters, that you should swing down. Well, scientifically impossible for this to be the optimal swing if the pitch is coming this way. And Williams showed that 55 years ago, roughly, and yet people still talk about swinging down on the ball, which I know why people say that, because the swing starts down, but it has to go up. It's so funny. I've seen a video of Albert Pujols teaching the downward swing, but if you look at Albert Pujols actually swinging, right, when he meets the ball, it's going like this. So the problem with hitting, of course, and again, this gets back to your original question, hitting happens so fast that it's really difficult to analyze correctly the swing unless you slow it down quite a bit more than most people do, which is one of the reasons that myth still exists, is because, sure, if you just watch it in real time, it sure looks like he's swinging down all the way through, but they're not at the end. Not when they hit a home run, anyway.
Yeah. I was a weirdo in that sense, because I didn't have a lot of power and I was fast, so I kind of did do that, even though I was taking the Ted Williams approach. But like I said, I'm nobody, dude. I was just a little high school baseball player. But yeah, I mean, I wrote about that in an article I wrote about Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, that Williams was like the first power hitter to be considered like a savant. Like power hitters were kind of looked at as big goons who just
Right.
swung away. And he was of the first generation where they grew up with a live ball and had been hitting it their whole lives and understood what pitchers were doing to counter it, and how often they could get in, favorable counts, and how the walk basically replaced the single as you were waiting for your pitch to drive for power. And that's kind of, just to go off on a little tangent, that's something I always kind of, more recently, like it seems to me that ISO is the more important stat than OBP. And one reason for that, and I don't know how you feel about this, Rob, I'd like to know what you think, is you're waiting for your pitch, not to get a base on balls. Like patience is a conduit to power, not to getting on base. Like getting on base is a secondary effect. Like what Williams was trying to do first and foremost was hit the ball for power,
Right.
and then the walks just made up for the singles you would miss, extending the zone like, say, Joe DiMaggio would do, and get all those singles.
No, I think that's true. I mean, that was one of the things that he preached, and then later Frank Thomas would talk about the same thing many years later. People would criticize Thomas because in an RBI situation, he would let a pitch on the corner go. And why don't you take a swing at that? Well, a couple reasons. First of all, your batting average on that pitch on the corner is not going to be good in the first place. Second, that pitch on the corner might be a ball, and you get on base that way. And third, and Williams preached this as well, it's difficult for a hitter to change their mindset from at bat to at bat. And once you get into the habit of swinging at pitches on the corner because you think you need to get a hit in that one situation, well, then you might start doing it more and more often. And all of a sudden, you're not hitting those home runs because you're swinging at bad balls, getting behind in the count, et cetera, et cetera. So it all plays out sort of together. And I think one of the things, it's very rare that you will see hitters change their style of hitting in their career. I'm sure it can be done. Very few people. I know Frank White, a guy used to love watching in the 1980s, played second base for the Royals. Out of nowhere in the mid 80s, he had a couple of 20 homer seasons. Actually, it might have been more than two, but definitely a couple. Batted cleanup for a little while. And he'd always been a singles guy, didn't get on base much or hit for power, and he changed his philosophy. And I've talked to him about it. He's written about it, but very few hitters are able to do that in the middle of their career. You kind of show up in the major leagues as the hitter you're going to be. You might get better as you get more mature, but it's difficult to change a philosophy from year to year, let alone from at bat to at bat.
Yeah, I was born in '88, and I got the new Bill James abstract for Christmas the year it came out. And I've been following you guys for 25 years now. And I just, as someone who was following it, what do you make of like the last? So the Phillies were the last team to get an analytics department in 2014 when they hired Clentac, and I'm using that as a demarcation because that's the last team. And from then on, there's been yearly historic lows in on base percentage that we haven't seen since before the mound was lowered. And as someone who was following, everything was OBP, OBP, OBP. And then I noticed, wow, on base percentage isn't that high, but everyone's swinging for the fences, slugging percentage and ISO. Do you think the focus on OBP from like more so from layman was a little bit misguided compared to the focus on power?
I don't know. I do think that as the pitching becomes better, which I think clearly it has become better.
Oh yeah.
Obviously pitchers throw, and I will throw in a caveat, which pitchers don't throw. The increase in pitching speed isn't as great as a lot of people think. The method of tracking pitching speed has changed. So, if you just went by what the figures that are published, you would think that the average fastball velocity has gone from 87 30 years ago to 95 now. For starters, I think, actually, by the way. But it's probably more like 90 to 95 or 90, but that's still a lot. It's really a lot. And the other thing that gets missed in all those discussions of fastball velocities, you never, I shouldn't say never. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure smart people have talked about it or written about it. But there is a corresponding increase in the velocities of all the other pitches as well. It's not only fastballs that are a lot faster, so are curveballs and sliders. And almost by definition, the faster a pitch is, the harder it is to hit, because the hitter's decision time is significantly shorter. So, having said all that, pitching is definitely better. It's definitely harder to get on base now because it's harder to string together singles, or it's harder to score if you're just trying to do. And you'll have every once in a while, every year or two, a team will score a fair number of runs, get to the playoffs without hitting a lot of home runs or drawing a lot of walks, and they'll have a high batting average, a relatively high batting average. And everyone will say, see, this is all you need to do, make contact. Well, it's difficult to string hits together, multiple hits in an inning to score multiple runs. And it's difficult to have a high batting average to string together years where you have a high batting average. You can do it. What you really want to avoid are a gazillion strikeouts, because if you're striking out, you're not walking or hitting home runs or hitting singles and doubles. So making contact is a good thing. It's just not clearly the most important thing. The most important thing is hitting the ball hard and over the fence. And most of the teams that are successful these days hit a lot of home runs. It might not be the most attractive game to watch for some of us, but that is what all the teams basically have decided leads to the most scoring.
Yeah, definitely.
I've been talking on X about some of this stuff. We struggle, the fans on the fans side, we struggle with what great looks like. We hate reverse split careers. A guy like Edgar Martinez or Beltre who just get better. Schwarber's reverse splitting his career. We don't see these guys very well. The other thing we don't see well is guys who are particularly historic in a category. Luis Ariz comes to mind because he gets on base. No one playing right now is going to ring up more 3 and 4 hit games. When you have 3 and 4 hit games, your team wins, right? And so there are other ways to be great. I mean, it's great to have Shohei Ohtani on your team, but there's only one of those dudes. And I'm struck by this, Rob, and I talk about this all the time. There are 300 starting jobs for offense. There are not 300 great players to fill those jobs, certainly not year to year. I just ran a little report on the last 3 seasons, the guys who averaged just 200 times on base. There's not 50 major leaguers who had 200, average times on base over the last 3 years. That to me is shocking. Like, we're not getting on base. And so, sure, you're not going to hit the ball over the wall, but you're getting on base 200 times. That seems like at least at worst, it's a high floor guy as opposed to maybe a high ceiling guy. What are your thoughts on that general, our ability to see what greatness is, because we're so blinded by the extreme brilliance of Aaron Judge and maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but that's a thing that I notice.
I like to think of it as not greatness necessarily, but maybe uniqueness. Arias is a unique at this point. He is a unique player, as Ichiro was when he was doing similar sorts of things. They're not the same player, but the contact rate is super interesting. And I'd rather follow one guy who's doing something he is doing than 10 guys who are doing sort of the same thing, right? So but he's a unicorn. And what happens when people see someone like Kyle Hendricks succeed throwing 87? Not that he's succeeded lately, but for a while he was. Or Arias, who's doesn't hit for a ton of power or draw walks, but makes great contact. And there's a tendency to think, well, if they can do it, anybody can. I tend to think that they are freaks, just in the way that Aaron Judge is a freak, and everyone can't emulate them. Because to me, if just as an example, if you could thrive in professional baseball throwing 87, there are many hundreds of guys who throw 87 who are not able to reach the majors. And if it were just as simple as I just need to work a little harder or learn to throw my changeup a little better, a lot more of those guys would be doing that. what I would prefer is a game to be designed to allow more players like that to be successful. Because if we just wait for more guys like that to be successful in the game that we have, we're going to be waiting for a long time. And baseball's kind of poking around a little bit, trying to do this and that. Like, oh, if we eliminate the shift, maybe we'll have more guys, more singles. Well, it didn't really work. It worked a little bit, but it just doesn't make that big of a difference. The fundamentals of the game, which essentially at this point are guys, starting pitchers averaging 95 miles an hour and a reliever is throwing 98, 97, those are what dominate the game. And you can tinker around at the edges all you want, but as long as you have the pitching set up the way it is set up right now, you're gonna have the occasional freaks like Hendricks and Arias, but that's about it.
Yeah. The thing I always say about modern pitching is obvious. Like, I get the stats, the 3 and 4 times through the order, and you're gonna throw in max velocity like that, you're gonna have to come out of the game earlier and stuff. And it's just like, the starting pitcher they're the only guys announced individually before the game. They stand on a literal pedestal in the middle of the field. Like, they're the obvious star of the game. And it just seems like baseball should try to maximize the amount of time they're on the mound and maximize pitchers' duels and stuff like that. It'd be nice to see.
No question.
But how do you legislate that?
Well, there are definitely ways to legislate it, and I'll bet that we could, with a very quick search, find 10 different rules that people have written about in the last couple of years. They're all fairly radical. Are they more radical than forcing relief pitchers to stay in the game for 3 batters? Not really. Are they more radical than actually enforcing the time between pitches, which a lot of people don't know this. The rule about time between pitches was in the books for decades. It just wasn't enforced. Is it more radical than allowing only, 2 throws to first base before the third one sends the guy to second automatically? So baseball has shown a willingness to do some pretty radical things in the last few years. It would take something maybe even a little more radical to keep starters in the game longer than they have been. But I think you can incentivize it in various ways. And that would probably lead to not only sort of paradoxically, we would see the best pitchers, at least by our lights, on the mound for longer, which is good. We'd also see more runs scored, because if you keep your starter on the mound longer, you're going to give up more runs. I mean, I know there are some people out there who probably think, well, those guys are so good. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been hearing people say the good starters get better as the game goes on. Well, we know that's not true, right? Because we've all seen the 3rd time through the order stats, let alone the 4th time. I don't care who it is. Yes, there are pitchers who, Tarek Skubal, for example, I think threw 100 and something in the 9th inning this year. I think if memory serves, he had a game where his the last pitch of a complete game was the hardest pitch he threw in the whole game. But again, we're talking about he's a freak, right? 90-some percent of all the starting pitchers are going to be not throw as hard and not be as effective the 3rd, let alone the 4th time through the order as the 1st time. So if we incentivize teams to leave starters in longer, and by the way, the best way to do that would be to stop letting teams carry 13 pitchers. That's the easy one for me.
Yeah, true.
I still can't understand why, with all the talk about this over the last decade, including from MLB saying, yeah, we want to do this. We want to see the starters last longer. We want to see more action. Why are they still allowed to carry 13 pitchers? I don't know. But that's the easiest way for the starters to stand longer. Not having 8 guys in the bullpen who can come in if you take the starter out in the 5th inning, 6th inning. But sure, you could do it, and it would be a more entertaining game. More starting pitchers more of your starting pitcher, which we all want to see, and more batted balls. that seems like an easy call to me. You want to do that, and I think we'll see it. I think it's just a matter of whether it takes another year or another 5 years, but I think it's coming. I think eventually, because there were people predicting 3 or 4 years ago that starting pitchers were going to basically go away, that more and more teams would use the opener, which I think has happened, but not to a large degree, because using an opener results in all sorts of cascading effects, right? You have to blow your bullpen out, and then you need a 8-man bullpen. So that's another issue with not using starting pitchers, is that you need that big bullpen because your first guy is going to go 2 or 3 innings. But I'm not sure how I got off on that tangent. But point being, we're all going to see what we want to see if they limit the guys in the bullpen and the starters are out there more often. So I think it's coming. I just don't know how long it's going to take. But assuming the MLB has the commitment to change, which they have said they do, and I know behind the scenes they've been working on all sorts of different things, looking at them, analyzing them, trying to figure out how to keep pitchers healthy, which has not worked, obviously. But I do think that there are the brain trust at MLB, and there are a lot of smart people who work there. I think they believe that seeing your starting pitcher on the mound for longer is simply good marketing.
Yeah.
And will sell more tickets, result in more money for everybody. So I do think it'll happen eventually. I just don't know how long it'll take to get there.
Hey, Rob, I got a question for you, and you can put your commissioner hat on for this one if you want to. But we've got a movement right now where we're very critical of the owners, and I don't know if we understand what a good owner looks like. It can't just be to run a business recklessly. There's a couple things that have to go into this. So, and also, by the way, I like to say this: baseball is hard. The midfield is always crowded. It's hard to stay out of the midfield. So what does a good owner look like? What are the hallmarks of that? Have you given this any thought at all?
I would say I've given it a ton of thought. The last 7 years, 7.5, I've been commissioner now for actually almost 8 years of our little league here in the Pacific Northwest. For anyone who doesn't know this, I'm the commissioner of I'll get the new baseball here. Not the old one. This is the old one behind my right shoulder. My left shoulder, this is this year's baseball. I'm the commissioner of the West Coast League, which is a sort of a Northwest equivalent of the Cape Cod League, which everybody's heard of. Now, the Cape League has the best players in all of collegiate summer baseball. But in terms of talent and markets and attendance and all those fun things, we're sort of up there with a few other teams below the Cape Cod League. So I think about our owners all the time because I work for them and I see it every day. Certainly, I try not to overstate the comparison between, or the similarity between, owners in my league, and we have 16 teams, and Major League Baseball, because for one thing, a Major League Baseball organization has 120, 150 employees, more probably now, whereas some of our teams have 3 full-time employees or 2. So the scale is completely different. Although, you know who owns one of our teams? The same guy who owns the Seattle Mariners. So there is a little bit of cross-pollination there, just not much. That's the most extreme example. But what I will say is a couple of things about that, about the similarities. Organizations take on the personalities of their owners. No question. I see it every single day, and I think it's true from our level. I mean, hell, I used to play Stratomatic baseball. My team was like me. It doesn't really matter how many employees you have, or even if the players are just fake on a little piece of paper. A team takes on the personality of its owner. The reason that we own teams, and when I say we, I mean humans, is because on some level, we think that we should have something that is like us beyond just our children and our dog. So I can I could point you to all 16 of our teams and say, yeah, this team is run, looks like this, is run in this way, precisely because the owner, this guy over here, is this way. He's like that. And you see it. You see it in the front office. You see it in communications. You see it on the field. Less so on the field, maybe, where the players and the coaching tends to take over. But I think it's the same way in the majors. I mean, I remember years and years ago, there was a team. I mean, I'll just say it was the Orioles. I won't go any deeper than that. But at the time, the Orioles had different ownership than they have now. And they had been failing for a number of years and just seemed like a mess. And I asked someone who had worked in baseball, maybe was still working in baseball, what's wrong with the Orioles? And he just said, this stuck with me for 30 years. He said, a fish stinks from the head. And I always reflect back on that pithy comment or metaphor when I see a team that struggles year in and year out. I'll give you an example. Colorado Rockies. It's not the general manager. It's not really his fault. I mean, it might be. He might be the wrong guy for that job. I mean, they just changed GMs. But if you look at, say, the Rockies a year ago, exactly 1 year ago, did they have any real hope of competing? No, not really, because they didn't have the players in place. They didn't have the management team in place. Well, why don't they have the management team? Why don't they have the players? It's the owner, right? It's the owner's responsibility to hire those people, to hire the right GM, to hire the right vice president of whatever, to hire the right, to pay for the right players. So ultimately, for me, sure, you can fire the manager. You can say the GM's an idiot. Those things might all be true, but ultimately it comes down to who owns this team, what sort of tone is he setting at the top, what does he expect from his employees, what's his hiring process like when he needs to hire a new GM. And I think usually you'll find, bottom line, when teams struggle year in, year out, and of course a lot of teams go like this. That's the nature of sports, right? Which is why you shouldn't fire your manager or your GM after one bad year. It just doesn't make any sense. But when a team is down here, flatlined, year after year, it's not the GM, it's the owner. And it's rare that, it's happened. The White Sox have been really terrible and really good at different periods during Jerry Reinsdorf ownership. He's owned the team since 1980-ish? I think he bought it from Bill Veeck. Is that possible?
I think so.
45 years ago-ish. But for the most part, when organizations struggle, it's because their owner is either incompetent or out of touch. And I would say, I'm not going to say it's the same thing in my league. It's a different sort, and there's a lot more up and down in my league. But I also have noticed that the same teams tend to be competitive year in, year out. And I don't think it's an accident, generally.
Yeah, I love this topic and your book about the greatest teams. Like I love reading about how organizations are built like that. Like did any owners have a bigger effect than the Colonels in New York? Establishing that business-like attitude that carried the Yankees through '64 that DiMaggio kind of exemplified. And yeah, and they hired Paul Critchell, I think, was their big scout.
Yep.
And Ed Barrow was there and doing things no one had ever done before, telling their leadoff hitters not to steal. They weren't going to hit and run. Frank Crosetti striking out 100 times a year at the top of the order, but hey, he gets on base and they're going to hit 3-run home runs and, revolutionize the game.
Right. Well, I mean, you're right. That was the key when the new Yankees new ownership came in. They went out and got Ed Barrow from I believe the Red Sox, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they basically said to Barrow, and this is what a good ownership does: you hire the right person, then you can sort of sit back and just watch.
Yeah.
and occasionally write a big check. But that's really your job, is to hire the right person and then write the checks when that guy says, hey, we need a check. We got to pay this guy.
Yeah.
And occasionally you will have an owner like George Steinbrenner who thinks he's smarter than the people who work for him. But it's easy to forget that the Yankees were not, I think the Yankees would have been better off if Steinbrenner had not been as active as he was, especially in the 1980s. And, this has been written about a million times, but the Yankees, of course, did not make the playoffs after 1981, right? Until 1995, I believe.
Yeah, Mariners beat them.
Now, they were good in the 80s. They had, I believe, this is one of those fun facts, the Yankees had the best record in Major League Baseball in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't make the playoffs from 82 through 89. But it's also true, and many books have been written on this stuff, they only came back in the mid-90s because Steinbrenner had been suspended and had to basically hand over control to people who were smarter than him. And so, my personal opinion, Steinbrenner was not a great owner after about 1980. He was probably a good owner because he was willing to keep investing in the team, and they were competitive, and they could have won a division title or two in the mid and late 80s. They just didn't.
Yeah. I think they won 100 games and didn't make the playoffs the one year.
Is that true? I know in 85 they finished just a game or two behind the Blue Jays. Maybe it was that year.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yep.
Boy, those were some highly competitive divisions too. Those late 80s AL East teams, because the Tigers had to win out that one year, and they get 87 or whatever it was to go to the playoffs. Just so again, baseball's hard, and the midfield is crowded. It's hard to escape from there, and one thing can change everything. And that's like when we get a little precious about how good or bad an owner is, And by the way, I keep looking. Everybody's complaining about the Dodgers. They must have 10 GM grade front office people that are there to be recruited away. I mean, Billy Gasparino keeps the Dodgers farm team well above average, top 10, better. Why doesn't anybody go and grab those guys? So they're available, right? But I don't know. It's befuddling to me to understand like what teams own. The A's owner, John Fisher, is perceived to be a bad owner by a lot of people, but look at the record of that team has won so many games, kind of like the Yankees. They haven't won a lot of titles, but they've won an enormous amount of games. They're one of the best teams over the last 20 years, 60 years, whatever you want. They just have been good. So is that a good owner or is that a bad owner? I don't know about that.
Well, in the A's case, I think people who say Fisher is a bad owner are basing that on his unwillingness to. I think we might have argued about this at some point, Pete.
You probably have, yeah.
His perceived unwillingness to invest in his team, both the team on the field and also a new stadium. And I will admit, I hope none of my owners are watching at this exact moment. I will admit that I am biased against billionaires who ask for subsidies for stadiums because it is socialism, by the way, in a sense, and it seems to me often hypocritical to say that if you want to keep your team in your city, you need to give me, billionaire person, $800 million or whatever it might happen to be. Yeah. I understand that financially it makes sense to do that, but in Fisher's case, he could have financed a new stadium all by himself. But it didn't make financial sense to do that. So I think the people who were upset that after a very long process, he moved the team to Sacramento, at least temporarily, and then Las Vegas. They have certainly been competitive with low payrolls, and you could argue that the low payrolls are all you could justify given the attendance in their stadium in Oakland. But they also did not invest in the stadium and tried to bring people in. I shouldn't say that. They did some interesting things there toward the end, for whatever reasons. We all like to think that if we had $2 billion or whatever he has, that we would just build our own stadium as a gift for the fans. But it's never been that way. It's just never. Right. There have been very few sports owners in history who are willing to spend their own money just to reward their fans for loving their team. But the reason that it comes up is because people who own teams tend to portray the teams as public institutions until that's no longer convenient, at which point they become businesses that require financing, perhaps from a different city, if they're going to continue to survive.
That makes me also wonder too, is the greater sabermetrics world, the people who use statistics, are they ignoring the cost on fan perception in what their math does? When you got that guy going for the no hitter and it's the eighth inning, and they pull him out, it's like a collective groan, like, oh man, we wanted to see that, right? Is there some kind of number that we could come up with that helps us understand when it's worth our time and money? Because hey, the people love these guys, they have these heroes. It seems to me that there might be something for that. We're just, hey, sign Aaron Judge. That contract may not have worked out. It has, but he's an old player, right? And so that was a risky contract. And I don't know, it's just so tough because we don't look. Nobody from the A's world is mad that the A's didn't re-up Barry Zito. So we don't remember those. Remember the ones that make us upset. I don't know. Is that unrealistic, or is there some way we could look at that?
I don't think that I wouldn't know how to analyze the cost of lowering the possibility of a no-hitter. But the more macro piece that you talked about, I think absolutely could be analyzed. Lots of teams, every team should know the data on what happens to, typically to season ticket sales when you sign a big free agent. I know that this was some years ago, probably 8 or 9 years ago, the first time that the Padres jumped in and spent a ton of money. And they've done this more than once. But there was a winter meetings that I was at in San Diego. That seems too coincidental. Maybe it was a different winter meetings. There was a winter meetings 8 or 9 years ago when the Padres went out and grabbed a bunch of guys. And none of those moves made sense financially to me. But the Padres season ticket sales went like this. Or maybe it was just their ticket sales for the whole season, including all tickets. But, there is a point at which what analytically looks foolish, looks like a foolish waste of money, actually makes sense financially, because even if the player, Eric Hosmer is the name that always pops into my head, that contract clearly made no sense. And I'm not saying you could justify it even now, but he was part of an effort that the Padres made to not only get better on the field, but they talked about this at the time. It's an effort to raise our visibility in our market by signing Eric Hosmer and 2 or 3 other guys, as I recall. And that worked. They made a lot more money that next season. And even though they didn't win that many more games, again, this is from memory, to me, there are 2 ways to increase your attendance. 3 ways, really. One is the most obvious, which is open a new stadium, right? We know that works. We've seen it a million times. The other way is to win a lot of games, and ideally early in the season. You can build a lot of momentum by having a good April and May and June. The Mariners' attendance in the last couple months of the season was outstanding because they were good last year and made the playoffs. Was it last year or the year before? Maybe it was the year before, or maybe the year before that. Time goes real fast when you're as old as I am. But we know that if you win a World Series, your attendance goes up. If you have a big first couple of months, your attendance can go up, especially if you're coming off of a season where you didn't win much. But the other way, I think it's been pretty clearly demonstrated, is by making a big splash in the off season, by spending money. One of the things that the Rays have found is that winning games doesn't really lead to greater attendance. And they weren't the first. I think the A's demonstrated that too back in the 90s or the early 2000s. Fans don't respond to wins year in, year out as much as they respond to making headlines by spending money. And that's what has, I'm sure, been frustrating for the A's and the Rays. Like, hey, we just won 90 games. Why didn't our attendance go up? Well, unfortunately, it's hard to get low intensity, low interest fans excited about 85 or 90 wins and a first or second round playoff exit. What gets them excited is hearing about your team in January and February because you spend a ton of money. That works. I think it's pretty clear that works.
Yeah, definitely gets the fan base going. I remember when the Phillies opened Citizens Bank Park and signed up Jim Thome and Kevin Millwood and David Bell. It was huge for the organization. I mean, it really helped turn the organization around.
Right.
Before that, they were on the up and up a little bit there heading into 2004, but after that, I mean, they kind of took off.
Right.
It's challenging too, like the political atmosphere of a place. Let's face it, the Bay, where I love and I'm from, we're pretty combative, and we're so progressive that we kind of ossify into a structure where we don't want to change things, and so like I always point this out because it's relevant to what we're talking about here. When the Giants got their ballpark moved, there were still attempts to try to lawsuit their way out of that legally, like the fans and the people who were contrary to the Giants. The Niners were on the same measure, and they got their park improved, and they never got it built. So there's these other things that come out where there's just a lot of things that make it difficult. And maybe it is true that there is going to be some, whatever the opposite of cream is, where no matter what you do, you've got an almost unsolvable problem. In this case, I'm making a political case, but it's not just that. It's just, California is nice. ESPN for a long time was the main voice of sports, and they didn't cover the Mariners like they covered everybody else. I watched it when the A's were good and relevant, and it would be 5 stories about the Yankees and Red Sox and a quick story later on about the A's. They never, ever led. And so that perception too, you're battling all of that earned media time that you don't get because, hey, Boston is bigger, Baltimore is bigger. And so I don't know, is it just possible that it's just a very untenable thing for some of these, things? And are I always say that fan bases, half of them are below average. They should percolate up and down, but not all of them do. I don't know how you fix Miami's problems. I don't know that you can spend your way out of it. How do you make yourself interesting enough? Like the thing I say about the Bay, and this is true in Miami, there are probably as many people on boats, if not more, than are at the ball game. It's just a very competitive environment. I don't know. And that's what I struggle to. I don't know what I would do. I don't know that anybody can fix Miami's baseball problem.
I really think that in baseball anyway, cultures really can change. When I moved to Seattle in 1996, and by that point, the culture had already changed to some degree because of what happened in 1995, when people just went crazy. I missed that by 6 months because I didn't get there until the spring of '96. But before 1995, the Mariners had never drawn from. Obviously, they had the team in '69 for one season. That was a disaster. And then the Mariners arrived in '77. And basically from '77 to '94, I mean, maybe I'm forgetting there was a year or two in there at some point where they really became the city's team and drew really well. But I think they probably didn't. And that was always blamed on a couple of things. One was that the Kingdome was a lousy place for baseball, which was true. Although people came in '95, and they came in '96 too, thanks to '95. So people would go there. But the other thing that people said, and this is more what I mean when I talk about culture, is people used to say about Seattle that it sounds so silly now, but you still hear this about other cities. There are too many other things to do, too many options. Why would you go to a Mariners game when you can go boating or take the ferry over to the islands or go for a hike, whatever it might be? And yet, as soon as they have that 95 happens, all of a sudden people want to go to the ball game. And there's political support to build a new stadium. And then, year in, year out, do the Mariners have the best attendance in baseball? No. But are they up in the upper half? Yes, especially when they're competitive. And when they generate some real excitement like they did this year,
Yeah.
does the stadium fill up in September and October? Absolutely. So all those cultural things, and I think this is true in Miami. I think it's true in Tampa, in St. We always say Tampa Bay. The stadium's actually in St. Petersburg, as you guys well know. But having been there, there are challenges because it's difficult. There's one bridge between the two cities, and so it's hard to get people to cross that bridge in rush hour, et cetera, et cetera. But I firmly believe that there's no big market in the U.S. or even Canada that couldn't support Major League Baseball if you have the right ingredients, the right stadium, a winning team. Those are the two big ones. Exciting players, that helps too, right? Ken Griffey Jr. and Randy Johnson. How are you not excited about that if you're a kid or just a casual sports fan? You do need those things, and some of them are organic and you can't create them yourself, and some of them are things you can create. And I've seen that in minor league baseball a million times where, team sort of putters along and barely survives in this market. And then a new ownership comes in and they try some different things. And all of a sudden it goes like this. Does it always work? No. But there are always things you can do. Winning helps a lot to get people to come to the stadium. I don't care if you're in Seattle or Miami or Tampa, St. Pete or Denver, wherever it might be. You can get 2.5 million people into your stadium if things break right for you. I don't care which market it is. I really believe that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lost you there for a second.
We're still here.
Yeah. I don't know. They've been talking about expansion here for a couple years, and I don't know. I always thought that. I think it's kind of pie in the sky. I don't know.
Where's here?
What do you think, Rob? What's that?
Where's here? Where are you?
Oh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, you mean expansion generally?
Yeah, Passan had an article that said about the league expanding, and I read it might have been his, but could have been someone else. But the MLB was dead set on expanding to 32 teams and realigning and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that it is inevitable. And by inevitable, what I mean is that we're not going to be at, what are we at now? 30?
Yeah.
We're not going to be at 30 for another 50 years or whatever. It's been, the last expansion was 98. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been almost, it's going to be ultimately more than 30 years because we're not going to have a team before 2028. I don't think, but we've been hearing what you said. We've been hearing that for at least 4 or 5 years, that they want to do it. They want to do it. They want to do it. But they don't want to do it before they figure out where the A's are going to play or where the Rays are going to play, etc. I guess there's one other team that's kind of in that same boat, maybe, or is it just those two?
Well, there's the Royals needed to get a new ball yard.
Well, they say they need a new one. I don't know why they need a new one. They just sunk $100 million or whatever into the one now, not that long ago. But I don't think the Royals are moving. I don't think any of these teams are going to move per se. I think, we know that the A's are going to almost certainly wind up in Las Vegas. And I think that there is a commitment to the Rays playing in Tampa Bay or St. Petersburg. I should say Tampa or St. Petersburg. It's a huge market. Why would you give that up? And all the other teams have pretty much, relatively new stadiums. I mean, the Marlins aren't going anywhere. It doesn't really matter what they draw. So I do think that expansion will happen. There's always political pressure from different places to add a team here, add a team there. I think that Salt Lake City, while not a huge market, could support a team. I think Portland, where I live, could support a team. I think one of those cities in North Carolina or Tennessee could support a team. So to me, there's no shortage of markets, because again, I think that the markets that are struggling now don't have to struggle forever. Very few struggling markets. How many times you might be aware of this history. A lot of the best markets in Major League Baseball right now, or at least markets that have had sustained periods of great success attendance-wise, almost lost their teams at some point. I don't know how many times the Cleveland was supposed to lose their team. Many others, thriving markets, almost lost their teams at one point. Toronto almost moved to the Giants almost moved to
Tampa.
to
Tampa in the
Tampa.
early 90s.
Yeah, before that they almost moved to Toronto.
Yep.
And at some point they were going to move to Denver too. I think there was a whole bunch of places the Giants were going to move. And look
the A's too. The A's almost went to Denver. Those two
That
were
was
always
the A's.
competing.
The A's almost moved to
Dallas
Louisville
too.
one time, and then also nearly moved to Denver. That's right.
And Phoenix was in the offing. They were always about to pack their bags.
That's right.
It was, but that was a different era too, though. But yes, you're right. They were never fully settled in Oakland.
Right.
There was always a rumor.
At one point, Buffalo was supposed to be a great market. So these things change over the years, and markets that look terrible 1 minute are great 10 years later, and vice versa. So you just it's very difficult to predict these things. You can't, no matter where you wind up expanding or moving a team to, on some level it's a leap of faith. There are no guarantees.
Yeah.
You're almost out of time here. I don't want to take too much. Is there anything else you want to get into, Brian, to wrap this up?
The only other thing I would talk about is pitching with analytics, but what do you think about, like, when we talked about pitching being ahead of the curve? How much do you think that had to do with like Tom House and Mike Marshall being early adopters?
That's a good question. I mean, the fact that House and Marshall became sort of legendary, I'm sure they inspired a lot of people to do biomechanical studies and other things like that. No question, Tom House, especially because he was publishing and working for different teams as well. But the Marshall never really got past being thought of as sort of a kook. And
he had some weird ideas. Dude.
He did. And he was also could be very abrasive in promoting those ideas. Tom House worked for the Rangers and I think one or two other teams as a consultant over the years. And I think he really inspired some people within front offices to do some real work. But those guys were essentially ahead of their time because the high-speed cameras didn't exist. The high-powered computers didn't exist. The staffs to run the numbers didn't exist for the most part. You can say the same thing about Bill James, who worked for teams and was publishing all those things. I think that those guys inspired a lot of incredible work that made a big difference on the field. No question about it. I mean, how many people were inspired by Tom House and Bill James, who then wrote things in various places, and then they inspired the people who work for teams now. I mean, really, those guys, Tom and Bill, are basically 2 generations removed from what we're seeing now. Because the people who work in front offices now didn't grow up reading Tom House and Bill James. They grew up reading the people who grew up reading those guys. I hear that all the time. I mean, nobody who works for Major League Baseball teams grew up reading me. I shouldn't say none. Some did. But most of them grew up reading people who grew up reading me back in the 90s.
Yeah. That's interesting. Man, I wish we had more time to keep going because I've got 2 more topics at least. But that's the reason to have another show. I will tease with this to say this, Rob, to get you thinking about this. I've been fascinated by the thought of the Hank Aaron Award and the MVP are too often both unanimous, and it's the same person. We need to drive a wedge in there. And Pete would say, from his looking, because value is traded in game. And so if Shohei Ohtani leads off the game with a home run, that's fantastic. But that value is going to ebb quite often in a game. And the key moments, the things that matter, They show up, and these season-long numbers like WPA over the whole season is muddy. But if you look at the individual games when they rise to a certain level, you start to see value, even if the player is a low-grade player, if they were big at the right time. So I don't know. I've been thinking about that, and like, how do we get better at seeing what's valuable instead of seeing what's popular? And not.
I think it's easy. The problem is we have to bother to do it. I mean, it drives me crazy that I spent years arguing for looking at wins above replacement, and now that's all they look at. A lot of the voters, right? But we have this other cool thing which measures how impactful the guy actually was. That's where the value is, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I could not agree with you more. And it's frustrating. First we look at just run at RBIs and batting average.
Yeah,
that's not great. Let's look at this other thing. Now we're just going to look at that. I don't know who was more valuable, Cal Raleigh or Aaron Judge. But if I needed to know, if somebody said, "Hey, this is part of your job," well, I would look at everything, not just this one thing. So yeah, it's a source of
I think I know. I think it was Cal Raleigh. Forget the catcher thing. The games become more valuable as you're competing for something. If you run away with the league, then they're a little less valuable.
Right.
But if you weighted those games as you go deeper into the season, and the Mariners go from the brink of contention for playoffs to a first round bye, hey, someone brought value to make that happen, and that to me is an enormous push at the end.
I also thought there was some value in him having a truly historic season, something nobody did. He did something nobody had ever done before. There's value there too. So without doing any deep dive, I probably would have voted for Raleigh, but they were both fantastic candidates.
Yeah, come on, they're both great, right? Yeah, but it's the unwillingness to consider anybody else.
Yes,
and I get the fans; they want their guy to win, but the writers should be doing a better job. And I would submit that Shohei wasn't even the most valuable player the last 2 years on his team; that somebody else was. And look, I've done the work. I've seen the games, and I've looked at them, and there's a lot of times when Shohei is incredible. I love watching him. This is not a knock on him, but somebody else was the guy in that game. And especially like Philly's pitching staff this year, if you saw those guys and how incredible they were, it is enormously valuable. And I would say there's a grade of quality of value. So yes, Shohei hitting a single shot home run during the game is valuable, but when you win 12-2, it's hard to discern who is the most valuable in the game. So there's a distilling of value that has to happen. Right. And when you have a pitcher go 7 innings and allow 1 run, that's among the most valuable things a player can do on a field in a game.
Yep.
But we don't even Brewers had the best record in the National League, and they didn't have anybody who was valuable on that team apparently. And that's like, come on, man. All right, I'll shut up. Brian, anything in closing before we go?
No, I just appreciate Rob coming on, talking to him, meeting him.
Oh, always enjoy it, guys. Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, let me wrap this up. Everybody, we'll see you tomorrow.